Hello and welcome. This is a public affairs forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther Elmore. This church holds and sponsors these public affairs forum on a regular basis, and we've been holding them since its church was incorporated in 1954. As far as we know, it's the oldest continuously operating public affairs forum in the state of Texas. We hold these public affairs forums, indeed, to inform our members and those in the community about important issues. And today we have a special guest, and I'd ask one of our forum committee members, Eric Hepburn, to come and introduce our guest. Eric.
Thank you, Luther, for allowing me the honor of introducing our guest today. We're talking about not only the person who has served more than one term now as Austin mayor, but also somebody who, in my view, from my vantage point of more than now 40 years around the Texas Capitol and state and city politics, who has been offering a master class in political strategy and tactics for trying to move from the vision thing to actual accomplishments in the world of politics. I have an anecdote in mind that illustrates my point, something that I've never seen done by anybody else successfully. When he was state senator, he came forward with a plan for a central Texas health regional plan with many different aspects, starting with a medical school for Austin, which was overdue. But he actually had the audacity to tell people up front that he was not going to entertain questions about cost, that he was only going to talk about the vision first and get the buy-in from everyone for that, and then we would talk about cost. And I thought, wow, how did he get away with that? Anyway, that's just one illustration of many that I could offer of the kind of savvy that Kirk Watson has illustrated over the years. And we come today at a time that's where it's particularly helpful to have someone like Kirk Watson talking to us as we're looking at a new cycle of decision-making about Austin's future. And I think that he will have much to say about that. By sheer coincidence, we're talking about this now in, I guess, the first week after your declaration of candidacy for another term. So please join me in welcoming our guest, Kirk Watson.
That's very nice. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was very nice, and coming from a longtime friend and somebody who I admire at the Capitol and the work that he did, it means a lot. And it's great to be with y'all again. As I came in, I guess with the pandemic, I was talking to somebody about the pandemic, and with all, it feels like it's been a while since I've actually been in here and in front of you. And a lot of you, I think I've stood in front of in this building, in this place, many times. And although over all these years, I look at you and realize you've changed and I haven't. That's amazing to me. I'm not sure how that happened. But we have all changed a little bit. What I thought I would do is talk for 10, 15 minutes about different things that are going on at City Hall and that vision thing and some of what we need to be doing, and then open it up for questions. And I'm glad we've tested the handheld mic. I want to make sure that thing's working so I can hear your questions. But let me start off with a couple things. One is the big question of why is it that I decided to come back to City Hall and be a part of being in the mayor's office again? Those of y'all that remember, I was in the mayor's office from 1997 until 2001. It's interesting, somebody the other day sent me a picture of 2nd Street in downtown Austin, where City Hall now sits, which was a council chambers at the time, and sent me a picture of that from 1999 and wanted me to see the comparison. And of course, if you've been down there, there's a significant comparison. Many people don't remember that in around 1974, the place where City Hall is built, that spot it was bought by the city along with the two lots next door, 2 blocks next door, and the block where the W Hotel is, and then another half block. It was bought in '74 with the idea that they were going to build a city hall on that space. And the old Calcasieu Lumber Company was located on that spot, and they retrofitted it and created a temporary council chambers. And in 1997, when I was elected mayor the first time, we were still meeting in the temporary council chambers. Only in Austin, Texas would something 20 plus years old still be considered temporary. And I promised that we were going to do that. And we tried to lay out a vision, and that vision was one that involved the entire 2nd Street, not just that one block, but the entire 2nd Street. And of course, we succeeded. It's interesting, about a month ago, Antoine Predock, who was our architect, he was hired to be our architect. Antoine Predock passed away in his 90s. And I'll never forget Antoine coming into the mayor's office, and whatever you're visualizing of somebody named Antoine Predock, you probably got it right. You expected him to come in with a cape and a cane, and he may be wearing a monocle. And he came in, and I'll never forget. He said, "Mayor, what do we need in City Hall?" And I said, "Well, Antoine, isn't that why we hired you?" I said, we hired you to make that decision. I said, but there are 3 things you ought to do. I said, we're right on the water, so we ought to do this in a way where you can go out on some form of balcony and look out on the water, which they did. And I said, the second thing is, I don't know that a mayor needs to have their own, they need to, I said, a mayor needs to be able to operate in their office and spread all their papers out and be messy as they are in normal life. But when somebody comes in to meet with the mayor and have pictures made, you need to have a separate room where you can go in and have the flags and shake hands and that kind of thing. And sure enough, that's in City Hall now. And I said, and the third thing is, I don't know that a mayor needs their own bathroom, but they need to be able to get to the bathroom without having to walk through a public space. I said, because people literally stand outside and wait for nature to call and then lobby me all the way to the men's room. And I've literally had women follow me in, so there's a bathroom in the mayor's area there at City Hall. And I told that story just pretty much the way I just told it one time in front of Lee Leffingwell when he was mayor. And Lee didn't know why he had his own bathroom. And so if you go through the building now, how rooms have little numbers next to they have little plaques next, E102 and that kind of thing. Well, Lee Leffingwell declared this space the Watson Room. So after all of my service, people ask, why'd you come back? I wanted to use the Watson Room. That's why I'm back. And it's the only thing named after me in the city, so I thought I better use it. So let me talk real quick about a couple things. The biggest reason I came back and wanted to run, and the reason I am still running, because this was a shortened 2-year term. Our charter has 4-year terms for mayors, except that in 21, we all voted to move the mayor's race to make it correspond with the United States president's race. And so in order to get into sync, that meant the next time there was a presidential election, the mayor had to run again. So the mayor's running again, and so it's only a 2-year term. And I'll be honest with you, with the work that needs to happen in City Hall right now, a 2-year term is just not enough. And I'm looking for a full 4-year term because there's a whole lot to be done. But we have done a ton. First of all, in my view, one of the things that was really needing to be worked on is we needed greater stability at City Hall. We needed City Hall to be operating in a way where it was organized for success. And of course, you may all remember that it was a very short time after I was in elective office again that we ended up asking the city manager to move on. And we brought in an interim city manager with the idea that that person would be there about a year, a little over a year, so that we could do some things to stabilize what was going on at City Hall. And that all was brought home to me. Of course, you all will remember, it was about 3 weeks into my tenure when the place froze up. I mean, literally froze up. And the response to that, in my mind, was not what it ought to be in terms of management. In that year, since we've had an interim city manager in place, we have seen a number of changes, including how we dealt with this last cycle of weather and how we communicated with the public, which was far better. But in addition to that, we have a new director of Austin Energy. We have a new director at the airport, and I can talk more about why those kinds of things are important going forward. But we also brought in a new assistant city manager over public safety, somebody who had actually been an acting chief of police for the city of Austin. So we did those kinds of things. We also looked at the fact that we weren't doing everything we had promised with regard to the bond elections. You know, you vote to issue bonds to make capital improvement projects, but we had about $1.7 billion of money that had been voted by the voters to be put into use that wasn't put into use. And so we stood up our own CIP program or office so that what we could do is make sure that those jobs are moving forward. The budget process had become one that just was all chaotic, and we changed that the last cycle. So we went through a very improved budget process. And of course, I'll end this little part of this with the idea that we just have hired a new city manager in a process that was a very transparent process, one that was open to a lot of public input. Many of you may remember that the last time that the city hired a city manager, they tried to hide where the interviews were being taken place. They were out at the airport. I remember there were pictures of, this is your next city manager, where they were hiding their faces so that they wouldn't be in the newspaper and on TV. Well, I said none of that. It is harder, by the way. I will tell you, it's harder to hire a city manager when everything's public. There's just no question about it. Because, if you're a star where you're at and you're looking to come to another job, you really don't want to have to tell the world where you're at. And by the way, we had one of our 3 finalists end up staying in Kansas City. Well, that didn't surprise me at all. Everybody acted like they were surprised, but it didn't surprise me because if he was good, if he's good, they're going to want him to stay. And so they offered him a situation. Interestingly enough, I was on a South by Southwest panel with the mayor of Kansas City the same time all that was going on. So great, by the way, a great guy and someone very easy to deal with. The second thing I want to mention about that was that I thought was a broken system was how we addressed the needs of our family and neighbors that are living homeless. In my view, we had a broken system. The city was broken in the way we were handling it. And that's a strong word, but I think it has to be said. I think it has to be said in the sense that part of what was not happening was we weren't looking at the entire continuum. We had done one of those things that Austin sometimes does. We've all seen it happen a time or two. But what that is we make it all or nothing. We make it all about one or the other. And it becomes almost partisan, not Democrat and not Republican, but what party are you a member of? And one of the big problems that we had when I first came into office was we made it that if you weren't 100% behind permanent supportive housing, and I want everybody to hang on to that thought, because we all should support more permanent supportive housing. We need more permanent supportive housing. I want more permanent supportive housing. Are we clear? But what we don't do is turn it into it's that and nothing else. Because what happens then is you find yourself in a situation where you have neighbors living on the street needing help and services now, and you're basically saying to them, I'm with you, just give me about 4 years. Well, that doesn't work. And so one of the things that we did is we came in and we said, first of all, one of the things we did was we said, we can't have every department, and that's a little strong, but so many departments all having a hand in this with no coordination. First of all, that's just not good use of resources. So we stood up a specific homeless strategy office that is now run by a fellow named David Gray, who's just first class. I'm very impressed with this young man. He's doing a tremendous job. But what we needed to do is we needed to deal with the whole continuum. And that included, by the way, having more emergency shelter beds so that you don't have to have somebody on the street. And a couple of things. By the way, I'd been mayor for about 3 weeks again. First 3 weeks were really rough. I kept telling people, if you see any frogs or locusts coming my way, call me. But one of the things that happened was a group of people, friends, people we all admire, who came into the mayor's office and said, by the way, we're closing the Salvation Army at the end of the shelter at the end of the month. I said, wait, whoa, what did you just say? I was convinced I was drunk. And they said, we're closing it, and they were upset that the city had not listened to them. When I said, why is this the first time I'm hearing it? And they said, well, we tried to tell your predecessor, we tried to tell people before. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not me. And by the way, that is some sign or symptom the place was not prepared to deal. It needed to be better structured, right? Things need to happen better. Well, that would potentially put another 150 people out on the street, or at least another 150 people with nowhere to go when they need emergency shelter space. So what we did was the city bought the shelter, and we've reopened it. And I think we'll ultimately have about 160 emergency shelter beds in that facility, maybe get up to 170, 175. But it's that kind of thing. We opened the marshalling yard. The marshalling yard is a piece of property that's owned by the convention center, which is the enterprise fund that is the convention center, so that when conventions are coming and they're going to be part of the Austin Convention Center, they can marshal their resources there. It's been used in the past as a place for emergency shelter when hurricanes and that kind of thing. And so we've opened it, and there are about 300 beds there. And by the way, it stays at about 250 to 275. So in the words of the business community, the market is telling us that we need that space, right? And it's expensive, but it's the kind of thing that helps with the ability to help people get off of the street. And I worry that we need to keep that going, because if we don't, then we're going to find ourselves with about 300 people. Actually, it's more than that, because as we find permanent supportive housing for those people, it's more people coming into that. It cycles through, and lives are made better. In addition to that, the HEAL initiative, which is the initiative to get people out of camps and into permanent supportive housing. One of the things, we have 2 shelters that deal with that primarily, and for years people said you have to have single rooms. People don't want to have anybody with them. Well, come to find out that's not true. People want a companion, and so we were able to double the size of those shelters simply by allowing a roommate in the room. And that's made a big difference. And the HEAL initiative is really working well. I can go on and on about different things in that regard. Let me mention a couple of other things, and I want to make sure I answer questions and get where you want to go. A couple of things. Austin Energy. I mentioned Austin Energy already. Austin Energy, when I think about Austin Energy and customers of Austin Energy, keep in mind, Austin Energy is owned by the city of Austin. We own our own electric utility. Pretty much every legislative session, we have to deal with some aspect of how what we can do in terms of governance and things of that nature. But one of the things that we did is we got a new general manager at AE, and I have said that we need to be looking at all of AE's budget as it comes to us, and of course we're getting ready to start the budget cycle at the city of Austin. We need to take into account affordability. That has to be one of our paramount things. What do we do? We also need to, but as part of affordability, and I will tell you, I'm critical of some decisions that were made prior to the past 2 years about Austin Energy to make sure that it is stable from a financial standpoint, because it's like taking care of your house. When the little things start breaking, you want to take care of them while they're little things. Because if you don't, then you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to start taking care of things, and it's going to be a bigger thing. Now, that doesn't translate exactly with what I'm thinking, but if you don't have a rate increase, a small rate increase, then at some point the world changes on you, and you may have to do something more drastic, and that's what I want to avoid. But affordability, reliability. I don't want your lights going out if I can avoid that. But I want to talk. Yeah, no kidding. But I want to make sure that we're looking at that. And then the third is sustainability. And I will tell you, I think that we ought to I did that purposefully in that way. I think sustainability, and what I mean by that is environmental protection, has to be at one of the first questions we ask. The prism through which we ask these questions, when you have the ability to be your own governance, we need to ask, what are we doing to make sure that we're leading when it comes to protecting the environment? And one of the things you may have seen me say is that I think we ought to have as our guide that we are going to be out of the coal business, we're going to be out of the Fayette power plant by January of 2029. And so you can count on me working on that. I'm going to continue to push for fighting and protecting Project Connect. We've got a housing, I hope we get to talk a little bit about housing. I'm trying to move quickly. I want to tell you, I was reading in the Atlantic the other day, talking about housing. I was reading in the national magazine, The Atlantic, the other day, and I wrote this quote down because I love to talk about it. It said, if you want to understand America's strange relationship with housing in the 21st century, look at Austin, where no matter what happens to prices, someone's always claiming that the sky is falling. Well, as your mayor, let me proclaim, Chicken Little is alive and well in Austin, Texas. That is so true. That is so true. But they went on to say that Austin has defied the narrative that skyrocketing housing costs are a problem from hell that people just have to accept. In response to rent increases, the Texas Capitol experimented with the uncommon strategy of actually building enough homes for people to live in. And so we're working on that. I will tell you that I ran saying that I thought City Hall had been stagnant when it came to housing policy for about a decade. Again, it was this all or nothing. Do it my way or no way. And what we got was nothing and no way. I will say that I believe, and I'm real proud of this, that this council has made greater progress when it comes to reforming our housing policies in the past 15 months than was made in a decade before. And it's important that we do that. And I'll tell you part of the reason it's important, and we can talk more, and I'm going to shut up with this last comment and listen to your questions. I got to Austin in 1981. Liz and I moved to Austin in 1981. And the good news for us, we didn't know anything about Austin. I mean, we came here straight out of school. We didn't have any money. We were starting our first jobs, first jobs right out of school. But yet, Austin had capacity when it came to things like housing. We were able to rent at a reasonable amount. We were able to attain housing through rent. Then we were able to cobble a little bit of money together and buy our first home. And think about that. That is what allowed us to stay in this town. Austin is Austin today, in my view, because we have a fountain of youth. And that fountain of youth is HT, Concordia, St. Ed's, and that little public university. And what happens is every year, lots and lots and lots of young people show up to Austin with new thought, new culture, new creativity, new music, you name it. And then they say, like we did, oh, I don't want to leave. But that's what's made Austin, is the ability to stay here. I'm worried that if we're not careful, we're going to be the first generation that creates intergenerational inequity. And it's going to be a situation where we've got ours, you get yours, not sure how you're going to do it. So one of the things I'm working very hard to do is assure generational equity. And how do we go about doing that? And I think we're making real progress in that regard. We can talk more detail. Why don't I be quiet and make sure some people, because I could go on. He'll tell you I can filibuster with the best of them. So
He can. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your comments, and thank you for revealing to us the trappings of power, including your own restroom. That is amazing. And so I will now ask you for any questions that you might have. Please hold up your hand, and I'll recognize you. Please keep your questions short. Please do not be over effusive in your praise for the mayor.
Oh, that's all right.
Or, on the other hand, overly critical in your criticisms. So please just ask your questions and let the mayor respond to as many questions as possible. If you'll hold your hand up. That's Mr. Russell Hines.
Hey, thank you. Thanks a lot for what you're doing. I was watching a show the other day, and they were talking about Houston and how they're dealing with the homeless there, and they created one organization to oversee like 150 different organizations, and the theme was housing first, and then they'll solve the other problems. So I'm just wondering if that's kind of influencing your thinking.
Yeah, so two things about, I hear about Houston all the time. Yeah, it's always, and the New York Times fell in love with Houston at one point, and by the way, that's one of the things about being mayor of Austin is that everybody else seems to be doing it better than we are. I told somebody the other day, I said, the only two things that I know everybody in this town are capable of doing is coaching a UT football game and being mayor of Austin. Everybody can do all that. But actually, there's a lot to learn from Houston. I tease about that, but there's a lot to learn from Houston. Part of the advantage that Houston has over where we are right now, in my view, is Houston actually started some of these programs where they had better emergency sheltering, better rapid rehousing, better prevention that was done, say, and I'm going to make up times here, I may not be right, so anybody's listening is going to send me a note saying, well, they didn't really do. But 10, 15 years ago, they were doing those aspects well, so that then when they go to housing first, which is permanent supportive housing, is another way is a general sense saying that, they were better prepared to get people into those. We're having to kind of build the whole airplane at one time. We're making enormous progress on the number of units, new units that by 2026 we will have available as permanent supportive housing. But we've got to get people in situations, including mental health type situations. One of the things I'm working on right now is, particularly as we cut the ribbon on the new Austin State Hospital. May 15th, we're going to cut a ribbon on the new Austin State Hospital, which I'm very proud to say I led the effort to get the funding in the legislature on that state hospital. And so it took a long time to get it built. Well, at the same time, we ought to be, thank you. It's one of my proudest things. In fact, Senator Pete Flores, a Republican who was in the Senate, and then he lost, and he came back in the Senate after redistricting. Pete Flores called me the other day because they cut the ribbon at the San Antonio State Hospital. And the reason he called me was because he and I worked as partners on the San Antonio State Hospital to get the funding for that. And he said he was sorry that they didn't think to invite me to that because he wanted me to. My point being, at the same time, we need to be looking at therapeutic housing so that people that are in ASH, that are coming out of ASH, when competency is restored, have a place to live while we then look for permanent supportive housing, because two good things come out of that. One is we don't put them right out on the street. The second good is it's like creating an extra bed at the Austin State Hospital, because they're not being held at the Austin State Hospital when we have a way for them. So there's a lot to learn from Houston, but a key part of it is how we build it all at one, in some degree, at one time. It's a good question.
So I have another question about housing. I suppose this is about housing. Okay, another question about housing. I suppose this is about housing for the wealthy, namely tear down houses and big houses being put in their place. We had the misfortune of having that happen to the house that was next door to us. We had a very unpleasant experience with the builder, but we also had a very disappointing experience with City Hall. It was a house on a hillside, when they bulldozed for weeks and weeks at a time, as late as 10 o'clock at night, and we called the building department. We were told that my question to you is about the city's response to this sort of thing and the codes. We were told that the only regulation about that was the same as someone having a loud party, that they could do whatever they wanted to until 10 o'clock at night. When they finished and they had a big hole in the ground and it filled up with rainwater, they didn't fence it. We were worried that a child might fall in.
I get the question.
We called City Hall and they said they're not required to have a fence. So the question is what can City Hall do about these sorts of things not being disruptive and not being dangerous in existing neighborhoods?
Yeah, well, it needs to. As you might guess, it's not uncommon for somebody to ask me a question about a specific incident that I don't have a clue about, that incident. And it's not uncommon for someone to ask me a question about some specific rule or regulation that, again, if I'm honest about it, I rarely will say, I don't know, but every now and then, I don't know. But the answer to your question is we ought to have in place regulations that make it so that if somebody is developing a piece of property, it doesn't turn into a nuisance for the people around there. And I don't know the specifics of what is required if somebody's doing something like that, but I'll ask that question.
Mayor, thank you for coming to visit us, and thanks for all your hard work. Richard Halpin, member here at the church, and we all know that there are tens of millions of metric tons coming out of the smokestacks at the Fayette coal-fired power plant. And that heats us up. And we're reaching a level of boiling. The planet is boiling in many places. I'm asking you if you can expedite that closure of the
That's what
Fayette
this
power
is.
plant.
Yeah.
From 2029 to, well, maybe next month, but a little bit, a little sooner than that would really help us all out, if you could do it.
Well, keep in mind, 2029 is an expediting of it. And it is also, there's a number of things. One is we don't own it outright. So we're in a situation, we have a partnership. And so we have to deal with the legalities of a partnership. The second is that we're part of I started to say national, that shows you how Texan I am, the Texas grid. And the Texas grid, which is managed by ERCOT, has reliance upon what sort of dispatchable energy we have available throughout the state. And while it is ours, we still are required to meet certain requirements. So we have to take that into account. And then the third thing I would say is that we want to go back to what I was saying a moment ago about affordability, reliability, and then sustainability. But the reliability part of that is we have to make responsible decisions as we're looking at those different aspects. We have to make responsible decisions so that we can be reliable to you. And, when he claps because I say reliability, it's because he knows what it means if we don't have enough energy to do what we need to do. So what I'm trying to do is responsibly address those issues. But remember what I said, because that's key, and that is, I think the prism through which we should always, if it's a decision tree, the first box ought to be, what are we doing to get us out of Fayette, right? That ought to be, that everything ought to go through that as we make these other calls and other decisions. So thank you. Yes.
Hello, I'm Peggy Morton, and I know you voted in favor of Home Phase 1.
Yep.
And there's several upcoming zoning code amendments. which hundreds of BIPOC people in our community are saying will trigger a third wave of mass displacement and causing housing costs to rise for everyone. So my two questions for you. One, why the rush of voting on these amendments just a month after seeing them proposed last Thursday at City Hall? And will you personally meet with community-powered ATX leaders who oppose home instead of just sending your staff?
Well, I have done that. And, well, you say no, but that's because maybe I haven't met with you, right? And so, but I have met with a number of people that have a lot of different points of view on this. This is not an easy issue where it's just all or nothing, and it shouldn't be all or nothing. So I have done that and will continue to do that. And I will have my staff do that when I think that gets me the opportunity to meet with more people and hear the point of view of more people. Just because somebody is asked to meet with staff is not a relegation that we're not listening to them. If I wasn't going to listen to them, they wouldn't be meeting with anybody because we wouldn't take the time to do that. But I'm not going to argue with you. See, this is part of the problem. Well, that's what you're, yeah. Well, I don't know that. I don't know that group, and well, that doesn't mean I know who they are. See, you're arguing with me, aren't you? Well, that's sometimes called argument. And that's part of the difficulty, right? Part of the difficulty to getting to a decision. We're not going to get to a decision that everybody agrees on. And part of the difficulty to getting to a decision, especially on this, and this has been a very interesting thing for me to watch. I've been doing this a while. And this issue is one that's been very interesting for me to watch because it's one where people have such a strong point of view on it that when I try to explain from time to time how I'm coming at it, they don't want to hear it. And that makes it difficult to make decisions, but ultimately a decision has to be made. Here's where I am on this. I'm listening and, in fact, learning. Well, you can shake your head no. That kind of looks like an argument to me, but I don't know. Let's go to the next question. Let's go to the next question.
Mr. Mayor, EPA and the Biden administration just issued new regulations for municipal water systems. This is to reduce PFAS, or forever chemicals, in our water. And so my question is, does Austin Water currently meet those new standards, or will money have to be spent to meet them?
You know, I don't know the specific answer to that. In fact, I've asked, and I have a briefing, I think, this next week or maybe the week after from Austin Water on a variety of issues, including what we're doing with regard to related to climate, with regard to purple pipe and water reuse. But Austin Austin has been and will continue to be, and I will promise it will continue to be, on the front edge of making sure we comply with whatever EPA is doing. So I'll be surprised if the answer isn't that we're either in compliance or here's the two or three things that we need to do to be in compliance.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Ernest Bauman. I'm a new member of the church.
Great.
And I haven't lived in Austin for a little under a year so far. But we've lived and worked and traveled in a lot of cities around the world. And when we come to Austin, we see a lot of room for improvement in the public transportation network.
Yeah, you think?
And I'd like to see if you have some comments on that.
Well, so I was the mayor the first time we tried to have a vote, or I did have a vote, on public transportation. It was in the year 2000, and I worked really hard to get light rail on the ballot, and we lost. The election was in the Capital Metro service area. So we won in Austin, but we lost in the precincts outside of Austin, and so we lost by less than 2,000 votes. Think of how different this town would be today had that vision been carried out. And think about how much cheaper it would have been, right? So one of the things that I worked very hard, I came into office and was immediately in a legislative session, but one of the things I worked on was the efforts to try to do away with Project Connect. We won legislatively on that. I don't think that means it's done legislatively, but I will continue to fight for the protection of Project Connect. A lawsuit has been filed to try to set it aside. We filed our own, if you will, which is called a bond validation lawsuit, so that we could expedite the determination, and that's all part of our effort to preserve and protect and defend the voters' decision to have Project Connect. So, yeah, you're right, and Project Connect is probably the North Star right now in Austin for what we need to do better by public transit. Let me just say one other aspect of this that's also part of an answer to housing. One of the things we're doing with regard to housing is what are referred to as equitable transit-oriented developments. I'm very proud that this council has moved forward on that, and one of the things that we're having hearings on right now are related to what can happen in those areas that run with those lines. Because what we know in other places and what we know from experience is that the transportation aspect of it is kind of the hub, if you will, of how people can afford to live in a city. If we can build more housing, and that will help with affordability, but if you can also add to that somebody can do away with one car or all cars because they have public transportation as part of it, you've just made it even more affordable for them. So that's a key part of how we're trying to look at this overall.
Okay. Well, Mayor, thanks for working to make a difference in our city in these very partisan times. I'm a member of a neighborhood group trying to make a change happen in a neglected public property right on Lady Bird Lake and Riverside. And I'm wondering, what's the best way to get in touch with your office to get our voices heard?
Which property is it?
Pardon me?
Which property is it?
The Norwood House.
Okay. Call the mayor's office, and I'll send a note when I leave here and talk to Max or Alexis, and I'll send a text to Max and Alexis to say they may get a phone call from you this week at a thing I was speaking at. But that's the best way to do that and get us all up to speed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Jim Bryce. Interestingly enough, a lot of what I wanted to ask has been anticipated in previous questions, and that is the relationship between transportation and housing or building in general. One of the problems I think we have, the major problem in this community, is the mindset of most people who have grown up in this part of the area of the world is not attuned to the idea of how public transportation works. 100 years ago, it began to be built here, but we stopped that. How can we let people know that the vital connection between those things is so important and incorporate it in our planning? For example, when the Capitol complex was being expanded down that axis toward the university on Congress, there was a great presentation at the Rotary Club of Boston about what it was going to be like. I asked the question now, beautiful, you're going to have good buildings, there's a lot of parking, but where is the allowance for public transportation and people to use that? The response was, there's a place on 15th Street with a sign for public transportation. Something needs to be done to increase the understanding of how vital it is and how more effective it is.
I completely agree with you, and that's part of the reason I've preached it as long as I've been preaching it. You know, I mentioned 2000. It was, I don't even remember when it was now. I was not in office, and I was the chair of the committee that got the red line done. And so this has been something I've been preaching from the beginning, and we now, assuming we need to win lawsuits and we need to win at the Capitol, but the fight at the Capitol is much the same kind of reaction that you get based upon what you just described. We have to be the disciples for it, right? I'm standing in a church, I might as well use that. But we have to be the disciples for it. We have to be talking about it. We have to be electing people that will be advocates and effective advocates for it, and be able to advocate the way I did in the last legislative session. And we have to continue to demand it. So the fact that you're focused on it and asking questions about it, we need to keep doing that. Is that there's no other way than to get more people to understand it.
Mayor, thanks for all the work that you've done
Thank you.
in the past Senate as well.
Thanks.
Tomas Rodriguez, I have about an 8-minute drive here on Burnett Road. Many people like me have problems with their back and other portions of our bodies. Driving on Burnett Road is getting a little difficult, like it was in Houston. Our house needs to be fixed fast.
Yeah.
What can the city do to quickly start resurfacing Lamar, Burnett?
That's a great question. I like to ride motorcycles, and there are some streets that I just won't get on, and I know a little bit about Burnett, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, it's even worse under those circumstances. One of the things that I said when I was running was that we needed to get City Hall back to basics and not off on some of the stuff that was being chased. It's been an intense 15 months, and that's one of the reasons that I don't think 2 years is enough, right? There's a good reason we have typically 4-year terms, because that's one of the areas that we have to get that fixing, as you say, as you refer to it as our home. It's what I was saying a minute ago. Making less expensive fixes now will save us money over the long haul. But that's going to require all of us that are making budget decisions it's going to require some discipline. And let me just say, I worry that we need to be disciplined in that regard.
Mr. Mayor, in a recent report, I think from the city demographers, it showed that the city of Austin, more people are moving out in a recent report than are moving in. Do they see this as a continuing pattern? And if so, then, or is this just an anomaly? If this continues, then what does that mean for the city of Austin?
Well, that's not look, it's okay for a region to be growing. It's okay for Austin to be the hub of a major growing region, but not at the expense of Austin. I mean, we all know the answer to that. I think a big part of the problem with that is affordability. And so I have approached affordability in a very significant way. I mean, you've heard me talk about it on one side of the coin from a housing perspective. We have to be doing more for affordability in that regard. The other flip side of the coin is, you may have seen recently, I announced the creation of the Austin Infrastructure Academy. Well, that's also focused on affordability, but it's from the other side of it. I can make something more affordable either by creating more of them so that there's more supply, and that impacts affordability, or I can subsidize it, make it even more affordable by driving the price down because we've put subsidies in it, or I can put more money in somebody's pocket. And one of the things that I think our economic development paradigm needs to evolve is it needs to evolve from just creating jobs and then proclaiming victory because we created so many new W-2s, but also take into account who we're putting into those jobs and making sure that what we're doing is we're training folks to have family-supported career paths. And that will include things like childcare as a part of that. So, I'm working on those kinds of things as well. The other thing I want to say is, in response to that, our housing supply is not what it ought to be. And we need to create more housing and make it easier to create more housing, or we will continue to have people moving out, even if it's not building a specifically affordable house that's 40% of MFI or 60%. It's just the housing stock. We need more housing stock. Yes, ma'am.
I'm an Austin native and part employee with the Austin Nature and Science Center. And one thing I've noticed during my time there is that a lot of employees are temp, and a lot of us have been there a really long time. Probably a quarter of the staff work 35 hours a week for over a year, which I was really surprised to see during my time there, because you would think you'd be a full-time employee at that point. And I just wanted to see, as the city continues to grow, as you may continue to hire new staff, if hiring more long-term temp workers is part of the long-term strategy for the city.
You know, that's not been, I'm making a note, because that's not something, typically that's a manager's determination, but it would involve the policy of what it is we want. That has not been something that's been discussed that I'm specifically aware of. So let me ask some questions about that. I just don't know the answer to your question. It's not part of a strategy that I'm aware of. So I need to ask that question. Well, what I want to do, if you'll call the office, what I'll do is put you in touch with somebody in the manager's office. But I'm not even, off the top of my head, I'm not sure who would be the best person. And I won't say, one of the worst frustrations is to send somebody to somebody that doesn't have an answer. So call and ask to talk to Colleen. Okay?
We only have about 5 or 6 minutes left.
Okay.
So please keep your questions very short.
So once more on housing. A while back at UT, there was a symposium on ways to help with affordable housing, and one of the examples cited is an old example in Austin, East Austin, where a group of people bought the property. They own the property. You can buy the house on it, but you can't buy the property. That was one example they gave, and it is in Austin, and it met state, the examples had to meet state laws. So one question is, does anybody look at innovative ways to help? That's one. The second is, I understand the legislature has tied Austin's hands on reducing the number of Airbnbs and investors who take valid single-family homes, for those who want them, off the books. They've tied our hands. What, if any, efforts do we see of help in that area? Any?
Yeah, two great questions. The answer to the first one is, I probably carried the legislation that allowed for that to happen, because Eddie Rodriguez was in the House and I was in the Senate. I give him great credit for being kind of the mastermind and the godfather of all that, but I would carry it for him on the Senate side, which would allow basically for you to create homestead trusts. That's not what we call them, but they have not been as effective as we would like, but they were part of that innovation. And yes, we just in the past 2 weeks, we directed the manager, and it'll be the new incoming manager, who was asked specifically questions about innovative approaches to where because we have such limited ability to stop gentrification or displacement. And these are ways that we're trying to do that. In addition to that, when we voted on Project Connect, one of the things that the voters voted for was $300 million in separate money for anti-displacement funds. And that money, a portion of that money, will be going when the city, again, that may not sound that innovative, but it really is pretty cutting edge. The city is buying Tokyo Electron's old site. Well, that will be like a mini Miller. And in my view, that will be a real opportunity for us to develop that in a way that does some innovative things. One of the things that has frustrated me is I've watched this over all these different years and learned as you go along, right? Something you think is a real innovative, good idea, and then it has a consequence. You think, oh, we didn't see that one coming. But one of the things that I look at Miller, the Miller development, the Miller development is a national, I mean, people look at it all the time for what a great, dense, it may be the densest development in the country, you know. I'll go that far, maybe not, but it's very dense, and it's been enormously successful. And it has a whole lot of affordable housing in it, because when we were doing the master plan on that, I happened to be around at the time, we purposefully put that sort of thing in there. But here's one of the things that it didn't do, looking back on it. It's nowhere near as diverse as I would like it to be. It's nowhere near as diverse. And part of the answer to that, now understanding, is because of lack of access to capital and credit. And so as we start thinking of the innovative things and start looking at innovative things, we need to keep that foremost in mind. So is there a way that if the city owns the land, like the new Tokyo Electron, is there a way we can deal with that in such a way that we make ownership and the ability to create wealth a portion of that? Interesting little fact. One of the things that we're looking at right now is reducing minimum lot size in the city of Austin. Right now, the minimum lot size is 5,750 square feet. We're talking about lowering that to 2,000. Well, here's an interesting little bit of history that helps define how we look at some of these things. In 1931, keep that in mind, that's 3 years after the 1928 master plan, segregating the city. In 1931 was the first time that we had minimum lot sizes, and it was 3,000 square feet. In 1946, when a whole lot of different things were happening with regard to segregation and the use of zoning and other land use regulations to create more segregation, in 1946, the city of Austin went from 3,000 to 5,750 square feet. In 1948, the United States Supreme Court in Shelley versus Kramer set aside deed restrictions based upon segregation as violative of the 14th Amendment. The point being, this was all done at a period of time, and right now we know that the number one cost in housing is the land. And so if you keep it at 5,750 square feet, you've made it where some people are priced out of it. And that's one of the reasons I'm looking at and support reducing minimum lot size. So yeah, we're looking at those things, and they're great debates, and we're getting a lot of people saying it's wrong to reduce minimum lot size, but if you're going to make this an accessible, complete city, you're going to have to create opportunities for that kind of thing that is suggested and implicit in your question. Why don't I do one more question?
One more question.
Hi there. I work with teenagers in foster care. 30 to 40% experience homelessness when they age out. I'm curious what initiatives you know of or things that we're working on to help our youth in foster care.
Well, first of all, bless your heart and thank you for what you do. Yeah, give her a round of applause. I'm looking at more that we can do, and in fact, got a briefing this past Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember what day it was, specifically on this. Because one of the things that is a real weakness in our system, is particularly when it comes to foster care and preparing young people coming out of foster care. When I was in the legislature, again, I spent a lot of time banging my head against a wall trying to figure out what we could do better for youth that were coming out of foster care and supposed to have resources and yeah, right. It was a lot. It looked good on paper. Actually, it didn't look that great on paper. But the point being that we need to be figuring out how we help more specifically on that. And I don't right now have a plan for that. But it's interesting you bring that up because it emphasizes that I'm at least on the right track, wanting to meet and understand more. LifeWorks is a tremendous organization. And in fact, when I worked with the state in the past year, one of the things that I was working with the state on addressing people living homeless, and I was able to convince them through the HD Housing Development and Community Affairs or something like that. I don't remember, HDCA or whatever, one of those acronyms. But the state gave nonprofits in the city of Austin $65 million to work on creating better avenues. And I was in the position of helping negotiate where that money went, and LifeWorks was one of the groups that we got, I think it was $2.5 million went to. So thanks for bringing it back to my attention. And like I say, this week I worked on that some, and I need to get back at it. Yes, sir. We done?
That's it. Eric Hartman of our own First UU, we appreciate you and your work with working with the city to get the mayor here. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here. And we look forward to working with you and all of our political leaders now and in the future can continue to make Austin the great city it is. Thank you again.
God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.